My pride sold our family farm to a corporation, but what they found when they started drilling wasn't lithium. It was something buried that just brought in the military. The dust devils danced across the cracked earth of what used to be our cornfield, mocking the skeletal remains of the irrigation lines. I watched them from the porch swing, the rhythmic creak of the chains, the only sound brave enough to challenge the oppressive silence of a dying summer. My hands, usually calloused from turning soil and mending fences, were smooth now, almost disturbingly clean. They felt alien to me. These hands that hadn't truly worked anything significant in months. It had been a slow strangulation, not a quick cut. The drought had been the initial fever, the rising market prices, the suffocating blanket. But the final blow, the one that brought the whole mighty structure of the Miller family legacy crashing down, wasn't nature's doing. It was mine. A stack of crisp, unforgiving white papers lay tucked beneath my thinning mattress upstairs. The promissory notes, the collateral agreements, the final damning signatures. I'd signed them during the darkest hours, fueled by stale coffee and a desperate, arrogant belief that I could somehow outmaneuver the inevitable. I thought I was buying time. I was actually selling everything. Sarah had gone into town for supplies. A trip that used to take an hour now took 3, because the nearest working grocery store was 40 miles further afield since the old co-op closed. And then there was Thomas, my son. He was 22, built like his grandfather, with eyes that still held the fierce, unyielding blue of the prairie sky before it turned to baked clay. He was supposed to be taking over. He'd spent his entire life preparing for this land, memorizing soil maps, debating crop rotation schedules with me since he was tall enough to reach the tractor seat. He had inherited my pride, but thankfully not my fatal flaw, my disastrous, secretive optimism. The sound of the old Ford pickup rattling up the gravel driveway shattered the quiet. It wasn't the slow, tired approach of Sarah returning. This was urgent, fast. The engine roared, a sound too aggressive for this desolate place. I straightened up on the swing, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I recognized the vehicle immediately, even before the dust cleared enough to see the driver's face. It was Mark Jensen's beat-up F-150, the one he used for hauling scrap metal these days. Jensen was a good man, a neighbor who'd weathered the lean times with grim stoicism, but he wasn't the type to visit unless the news was either dire or unbelievably good. Given the state of the world, I braced for dire. Jensen killed the engine 50 feet from the porch, not even bothering to turn the wheels off the main track. He jumped out, leaving the driver's side door swinging open, and he didn't walk towards me so much as he charged. His face was ashen, smeared with road grime, and his eyes were wide, fixed on something beyond me, something happening right here at our farmhouse. "Jedediah!" Jensen gasped, leaning his hands on his knees, sucking air. "Jed, what in God's name have you done?" I managed a weak, steadying breath, trying to project an authority I no longer possessed. "Mark, slow down. What is it? Did Sarah get in an accident?" Jensen shook his head, his gaze flickering nervously towards the house, then back to me, a look of pure, terrified pity crossing his features. No, worse. There are people out front. A convoy, trucks, RVs, a whole mess of foreign plates. They're unloading equipment, Jedediah. Heavy equipment. They're setting up surveyors' stakes right by the old wellhead. My blood ran cold, a sensation more jarring than the heat. Surveyors? Equipment? This wasn't a neighborly visit. This was an invasion. "What are you talking about, Mark? Who sent them?" Jensen pushed himself upright, his voice dropping to a strained whisper, his eyes darting again to the edge of the property line. "They said they bought it, Jed. They showed me the paperwork. A holding company out of the city. Bought the deed last month. They said you signed over the rights. They said we need to vacate the premises by sundown." Before I could process the dizzying impossibility of that statement, the land, my land, signed away, the screen door behind me burst open. Thomas stood framed in the doorway, wiping grease from his forehead with a rag, his stance immediately defensive at the sight of Jensen's distress. He hadn't heard the conversation, only the frantic energy radiating off the two men. "Dad? Mark? What's going on? I heard yelling." Thomas stopped dead. His eyes tracked from Jensen's panic to the strange, large vehicles now parked brazenly in our driveway, their occupants, strangers in brightly colored vests, already dragging hoses and measuring tapes across the very soil Thomas had just spent all morning trying to save with makeshift drip lines. Thomas's face went from confusion to incandescent rage in a terrifyingly fast second. He dropped the rag. He looked back at me, his blue eyes blazing with betrayal so deep it felt like a physical blow. "Dad," Thomas said, his voice dangerously low, shaking with controlled fury. "Tell me that isn't what I think it is. Tell me you didn't let some land sharks onto our property. We're barely hanging on, but we're here. We're fighting. Tell me you didn't sell our farm." He took a step towards me, his heavy boots crunching on the loose porch decking, the unspoken accusation hanging heavy in the dry air between us. I opened my mouth, the true, ugly confession choking in my throat, the explanation of the crippling, hidden debt I'd accumulated, the debt that forced this catastrophic sale, but the words wouldn't come out. Just then, a tall man in a pristine white hard hat, looking entirely too clean for this environment, detached himself from the group by the old oak tree. He walked directly toward us, holding a rolled-up blueprint like a scepter, a condescending smile already set on his face. He stopped 5 feet from Thomas, surveying the Miller homestead, the peeling paint, the struggling garden, the desperate pride clinging to the edges, with undisguised distaste. He cleared his throat loud enough to cut through the rising tension. "Mr. Miller, I assume. Excellent. We're ahead of schedule. The papers are all in order, signed and notarized. We just need you to clear out your personal effects. By the way," he paused, nodding toward Thomas with a patronizing air, "your son seems agitated. Perhaps you should explain to him that this entire parcel, including the house, is now the property of Silver Stream Development. We start remediation tomorrow." Thomas didn't flinch. He just stared at the man, his entire body coiled like a spring, his eyes never leaving mine, waiting for the denial that I knew, with sickening certainty, would never come. Then Thomas turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto mine with the searing intensity of 1,000 suns. His voice cracked, raw with the sudden realization of my failure, the annihilation of his future. "You gave our farm to strangers?" my son shouted, unaware of my debt, and the stranger smirked, waiting for my broken response. The silence that followed Thomas's outburst was so profound it seemed to suck the very oxygen from the porch. Mark Jensen visibly winced, stuffing his hands into his pockets as if trying to physically restrain himself from intervening in a deeply private, catastrophic explosion. The development man, however, merely raised an eyebrow, taking proprietary pleasure in the drama of displacement. "Well now," the stranger drawled, adjusting the crease in his trousers, "that sounds like a family matter, gentlemen. But let's keep the noise down. We have environmental assessments to run before dusk." Thomas didn't look at the stranger again. His entire universe had narrowed down to the betrayal etched onto my face. He took another step toward me, and I instinctively took a half step back, a pathetic, shrinking motion that confirmed everything he suspected. "Dad," Thomas repeated, the volume lower this time, but the weight infinitely heavier. It wasn't a shout anymore. It was the sound of steel being drawn from a sheath. "Look at me. Did you sell it? Did you actually sell the land Grandpa fought to keep through the Dust Bowl? Did you sell us out?" I finally found my voice, though it came out thin and reedy, utterly insufficient for the monumental lie I had to sustain. "Thomas, it's complicated. There were obligations. I was trying to protect us." "Protect us?" Thomas laughed, a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. "By letting strangers plant flags on our acreage, by driving Sarah 40 miles for bread. What obligation is worth this? We're family farmers, Dad. We don't just sell." My eyes flickered toward the white hard hat, seeking an ally, a distraction, anything. But the man was already turning away, signaling his crew to get back to work, as if the Miller family's collapse was merely an amusing preamble to their afternoon agenda. This audacity ignited a different kind of fire in me, the embers of the man I used to be, the one who faced down bankers and hailstorms with equal disdain. "That's enough," I snapped, finding a shred of my old authority. I stepped forward, placing myself physically between Thomas and the developer. "This is not your business, and you," I jabbed a finger toward the white hat, "you will not talk to my son like that. We will pack. We will leave, but you will give us until morning. Not tonight. Morning." The developer paused, considering me with an unnervingly calculating stare. "Mr. Miller, the contract stipulated immediate takeover upon default confirmation, which, I note, was this morning. We've been authorized to begin preliminary drilling immediately. We need access to the bedrock now to verify mineral rights compliance." "Mineral rights?" Thomas echoed, instantly alert, his rage momentarily overridden by professional curiosity. "What mineral rights? We have sandstone and silt for 300 feet down." The developer finally showed a genuine flicker of surprise, perhaps realizing he'd stumbled onto a deeper layer of ignorance. He smirked again, a truly repulsive expression. "Oh, did no one inform you? Congratulations, Mr. Miller. Your farm sits directly above one of the largest untapped lithium seams in the state. That's why Silverstream was so eager to finalize your outstanding debt package quietly. You didn't just owe a few loan payments, Mr. Miller. You owed the future." The air seemed to freeze. Lithium. The word was a detonation. I had mortgaged the farm for operational loans, believing the banks were merely predatory lenders trying to seize prime agricultural land. I had no idea about the geological surveys, the contingency clauses tucked into the fine print of the refinancing agreements I'd signed when the drought first hit. I hadn't just lost the farm, I'd unknowingly handed over a fortune. Thomas looked at me, his face a mask of incredulous horror. He wasn't just upset about the land, he was realizing the depth of my deception, the scale of my incompetence. "Dad," Thomas whispered, his voice hollow, "you didn't just default on the mortgage. You signed away mineral extraction rights? When did you even look at the secondary addendums?" I looked down at my hands, those clean, useless hands. I remembered the night. The bourbon bottle had been half empty. The lawyer from the city, a slick man named Davies, had kept insisting, "Just sign here, Mr. Miller. This section merely clarifies the collateral transfer structure for the holding entity." I signed. I always trusted the paperwork would align with the basic understanding. Land for loan. I never imagined the land itself was sitting on a ticking geological time bomb. I didn't know, Thomas, I swear," I mumbled, the words tasting like ash. "I thought it was just the usual collateral boilerplate." The developer clapped his hands once sharply. "See? Ignorance isn't bliss. It's profitable for us. Now, if you could kindly move your truck, Mr. Miller. We need to position the seismic testing unit right where your barn currently stands." Thomas recoiled as if physically struck. The barn. The barn where his mother's wedding dress was stored, where his first calf was born, where he'd spent every winter evening tinkering with engines alongside me. "You touch that barn," Thomas growled, taking a purposeful step toward the developer. "And I swear, I will stop you myself." The developer just smiled, unconcerned, and pulled a small satellite phone from his pocket, already dialing. "Team, deploy the heavy machinery. Priority target, the auxiliary structure on the east side. We need clear space for the core sampler." Thomas exploded. He lunged forward, tackling the developer with a desperate fury, knocking the man backward onto the dusty drive. Blueprints scattered. The satellite phone skittered across the gravel. It was a clumsy, enraged attack, fueled by years of suppressed respect, now curdled into pure wrath. Two burly construction workers immediately dropped their equipment and converged on Thomas. They weren't security guards. They were hardhats, bigger and stronger than Thomas, moving with cold, professional coordination. "Get off him!" Jensen yelled, finally moving, trying to pull one of the workers off Thomas's back. I watched, paralyzed, as Thomas struggled against the two men, his face turning purple with exertion and rage. I should have moved. I should have fought for him. But I was pinned by the crushing weight of my own secret. The debt that cost us everything, the debt he now knew I had incurred through sheer, blind arrogance. Just as Thomas managed to twist free, kicking one man squarely in the knee, the second worker slammed a heavy gloved fist into the side of Thomas's head. Thomas went limp instantly, dropping like a puppet whose strings had been cut, landing hard beside the developer's discarded hard hat. A moment of stunned silence fell again, broken only by the distant low rumble of larger trucks approaching the main road. The heavy machinery Mark Jensen had mentioned? The developer slowly rose, brushing dust from his pristine white shirt, his face now hard and humorless. He looked down at the unconscious Thomas, then up at me, his eyes conveying a final, chilling ultimatum. "That was unwise, Mr. Miller. I suggest you take your son and whatever personal belongings fit in your pickup, and you leave now, because when those specialized earth movers arrive, they won't be concerned with misplaced sentiment or with anyone standing in the way of extracting millions of dollars of lithium." He pointed past me, toward the narrow dirt track leading to the farmhouse. "You have 5 minutes to get your truck moving, or we'll tow it and everything inside it off the property." I didn't hesitate. The sight of Thomas utterly broken on the ground jolted me into action. I rushed to my son, shoving Jensen aside. I hoisted Thomas's dead weight over my shoulder. He was heavier than I remembered, or maybe the sudden fear had sapped my strength. I stumbled toward the porch, trying to ignore the sound of the heavy trucks now close enough that I could feel the vibration through the soles of my boots. I laid Thomas gently on the worn rug in the living room. His breathing was shallow, ragged. I grabbed the keys to the Ford from the hook by the door, my mind a frantic scramble. Get Thomas to a hospital. Get Sarah. Get out. As I turned back toward the doorway, ready to sprint out and find Sarah, I noticed something wedged tightly under Thomas's hand, something he must have grabbed instinctively during the struggle. It wasn't his rag. It was a single thick sheet of paper, torn free from the blueprints the developer had dropped. My eyes fell on the exposed corner of the document. It wasn't a survey map or a drilling schematic. It was a header, bold and official, detailing a legal action. And stamped clearly at the bottom, next to a date 3 weeks from now, was a familiar name, not Silver Stream Development, but the name of the bank that held the original mortgage. Beneath that, in bold type, was the chilling declaration: Notice of immediate civil seizure and impoundment of primary residence and associated assets under State Statute 14. B. Failure to remediate environmental violations pending lithium extraction commencement. The debt wasn't just the loan. The debt was the land, and now, apparently, the consequences of losing the land were being pinned squarely on me, too. A final, legally binding accusation that Thomas, unconscious and bruised, was now inexplicably clutching like a talisman. The seismic shift in reality caused by that scrap of paper was more disorienting than the sight of Thomas unconscious. Civil seizure? Environmental violations? I was a farmer, not a corporate criminal. My failures were financial and personal. They weren't supposed to be state-level offenses. I snatched the paper from Thomas's grip, my fingers fumbling over the dense legalese. The truck engines were deafening now, vibrating the floorboards of the house. I could hear the screech of heavy treads grinding the dry earth just outside the yard. They weren't just setting up, they were arriving with intent to demolish. I scanned the text again, desperately searching for context, for the lie I could cling to. The statute referenced an internal audit revealing that I had knowingly used unapproved chemical runoff, a charge that was patently absurd. We used standard government-approved fertilizers, nothing more. Yet here it was, formalized, dated, and tied directly to the very moment Silver Stream was taking possession. It implied a trap far more sophisticated than simple loan sharking. The screen door banged open again, this time Sarah standing there, clutching a nearly empty bag of flour and a gallon jug of water. Her face was etched with the worry of a long, thirsty drive. But when she saw Thomas lying motionless on the rug, the groceries tumbled from her hands, scattering white powder across the floor like a fresh, unwelcome snowfall. "Thomas! Jedediah, what happened?" Sarah rushed past me, kneeling instantly by our son, her practiced hands checking his pulse, his neck, her voice trembling as she murmured reassurances he couldn't hear. "Sarah, listen to me. You have to listen. I pleaded, shoving the damning document into her hands. They bought the farm, they're starting mobilization, and there's something else. They fabricated violations. They're using this to push us out now. Sarah's eyes darted between the unconscious Thomas and the cryptic paper in her grasp. Jensen, still hovering anxiously near the porch entrance, saw the confusion on her face and stepped inside, stepping carefully around the flour spill. "Sarah," I tried to stop him. Jensen said quietly, nodding toward the commotion outside where the first massive piece of excavation equipment, a bulldozer larger than our old grain silo, was beginning to pivot ominously toward the house. "They're not messing around. They're ready to clear everything." Sarah looked up at me, her expression hardening with the clarity of someone who had just seen the whole rotten truth laid bare. "You let this happen, Jedediah. You didn't just borrow money, did you? You made deals you didn't understand. You gambled with this land." The accusation stung worse than the developer's sneer. "I was trying to save it. The drought, the market. I was drowning, Sarah. This lithium thing. I didn't even know it existed until 5 minutes ago. They lured me in." "Lured you in?" she shot back, her voice rising to meet the roar of the approaching machinery. "Lured you into signing away the bedrock of our grandchildren's future? Did you read any of that paperwork, Jedediah? Or did you just sign where the slick man pointed, trusting your pride would fix it later?" I had no defense. My pride, my fatal flaw, was now standing guard over my son's prone body while strangers prepared to erase our lives. The developer himself strode into the open doorway, blocking the light. He looked directly at Sarah, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Ma'am, I sympathize with the shock, but property lines are property lines. We have an injunction. If you do not vacate immediately, we will be forced to have your son and yourselves removed by law enforcement acting on behalf of the state regarding the environmental violations. We already alerted them to the necessary containment procedures." Jensen took a sharp step back. "They called the county sheriff? Already?" The developer merely smiled, producing a thick packet of papers from under his arm, a warrant sealed and official. They were notified the moment Mr. Miller failed to surrender the premises at the stipulated time this morning. We are not just developers. We are authorized agents of the State Mineral Oversight Board, overseeing the transition to extraction protocol. The sheer coordinated brutality of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just bought the debt. They had weaponized the legal system against the very man who signed the papers. "We need time," Sarah pleaded, standing up slowly, placing herself between the developer and Thomas. "Just until morning. We'll go to the courts. We'll fight the seizure." "The courts are closed, Mrs. Miller," the developer countered smoothly, "and the injunction is active. You have 3 minutes to gather essentials before the demolition team begins its work. Security protocol mandates that any non-essential structures must be cleared prior to heavy equipment deployment. That includes the farmhouse." The bulldozer outside gave a massive grinding shudder, its blade rising slightly as the operator prepared to swing the machine around. It was aimed directly at the porch, aiming to take out the front steps first. "No, you leave us alone," I roared, finally finding the strength to move past my shame. I lunged for the developer, not to fight him, but to rip that official seizure warrant from his hand, to examine the true nature of the environmental violation. But as my fingers brushed the edge of the paper, the developer moved with surprising agility. He sidestepped my clumsy grab, bringing his free elbow up hard against my temple. The world spun into a nauseating kaleidoscope of splintered light and grinding noise. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. I slid down the rough plaster, dazed, watching through watering eyes as the developer, completely unfazed, tucked the warrant back into his jacket. He turned to Sarah, who stood rigid, bracing herself. "Last chance, Mrs. Miller. Move your son, or we move him, and frankly, we aren't as gentle as you are." Sarah glanced desperately at the massive bulldozer now swinging its enormous bulk toward the foundation, then down at Thomas's still form. She knew a fight was impossible. She made a split-second decision that tore my heart in two. "Go, Jedediah. she choked out, her eyes shining with unshed tears of fury. "Go get help. Go to the police. Go to anyone. I'll get Thomas to the truck. Just go before they flatten us both." I stared at her, wanting to argue, wanting to stay and face this inevitable destruction with her, but the sound of the engine revving high, the prelude to tearing the house down, galvanized me. If I stayed, we all fell. If I left, maybe, just maybe, I could find the slick lawyer Davies or the bank manager and unravel this nightmare. I took one last agonizing look at my wife shielding our son beneath the shadow of the impending destruction, then bolted out the door, sprinting toward the sound of Sarah's truck down the gravel drive, praying I could reach her before the blades descended. As I reached the perimeter where Jensen stood frozen in silent horror, I heard the colossal sound of metal grinding against wood, not the expected crunch of the foundation, but a tearing, splintering noise from the back of the house. I stopped dead in my tracks, turning back just as a cloud of ancient dust erupted from the roofline of the old, unused smokehouse, a structure far from the main farmhouse, miles from the planned demolition zone. And silhouetted against the blinding afternoon sun, standing atop the ruined roof of the smokehouse, was a figure I hadn't seen since the first day of the drought. A gaunt, ragged man, holding a rusty shotgun leveled directly at the approaching bulldozer operator, screaming a soundless battle cry of pure desperation. It was my estranged hermit brother, Silas, who hadn't spoken to me in 10 years, suddenly appearing as the farm's last unhinged defender. The eruption of violence from the smokehouse was the pivot point, the moment the Miller family tragedy transformed from quiet financial ruin into a full-blown chaotic siege. Silas? I hadn't thought of him in months. The black sheep, the one who refused modernization, the one who swore he'd die on this dirt rather than deal with the bankers. Now he was here, the unexpected volatile fuse lit under the whole operation. The bulldozer operator, startled by the sudden appearance of an armed man on the roof of an ancillary building, slammed the brakes. The machine shuddered to a halt, its massive blade hanging mere feet from where Sarah was frantically trying to load the still unresponsive Thomas into the cab of the aging Ford pickup. The developer, recognizing immediate liability, dropped his civilized pretense. He snatched the satellite phone back from the gravel and barked a single sharp command. "Forget the primary structure for a moment. Secure the hostile. Take down the armed threat on the smokehouse. Now, security detail. Move on the residents. Force compliance." Jensen shouted, "No, wait. That's Silas Miller. He's unstable. You bring police into this and it escalates." But the instruction was already being carried out. 3 men in dark, unmarked utility vests, the security detail, abandoned their mapping equipment and surged toward the house. They bypassed Sarah and Thomas entirely, focused solely on neutralizing Silas and securing the area around the main residence, perhaps assuming the structural demolition was secondary to containing the armed uprising. Sarah looked at me, her face a roadmap of panic and resolve. "Go, Jed! Go get help! Silas is losing it, and they're going straight for the house where Thomas is. I can't defend him and hold off those men." I knew she was right. I couldn't fight 3 trained security personnel while lugging Thomas. Silas, for all his sudden heroism, was merely providing a crucial, terrifying distraction. My mission had shifted. I had to find the authority that would stop this wholesale takeover, and I had to do it before Silas ended up dead, or Sarah and Thomas were forcibly ejected. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, Sarah. Don't move. Don't engage them if you can avoid it," I said, forcing the words out. Then I turned and sprinted toward the county road. I didn't run toward the nearest town. I ran toward the only place I knew held the keys to the financial labyrinth, the dilapidated single-story office of Harold Davies, the attorney who had orchestrated my ruin, located 5 miles back toward the highway junction. The run was brutal. My lungs burned in the dry heat, and every step was shadowed by the fear of what the developer's security team was doing back at the farm. I could hear the faint, frantic shouts echoing even from this distance. Sarah's protests, perhaps the report of Silas's shotgun, or the heavy thud of the security team engaging the house. When I reached Davies' office, the blinds were drawn tight. The place looked deserted, which was typical for a small-town lawyer mid-afternoon. I hammered on the door, screaming Davy's name. No answer. I checked the windows. Locked. Panic was a rising acid in my stomach. I turned, preparing to smash a window, when I noticed a faded, handwritten note taped carelessly to the inside of the glass panel, visible only because the angle of the sun had shifted. It wasn't a professional notice. It was scrawled in Davy's recognizable, shaky hand. Gone to city, finalizing the Miller file settlement. Don't wait for me. They're buying everything, even the liability. Buying the liability. The word struck me with icy clarity. Davies wasn't just facilitating the loan default, he was selling the legal repercussions, the fabricated environmental violations, to Silver Stream as part of the clean acquisition package. He had not only bankrupted me, he had made me criminally liable for a phantom contamination to sweeten the deal for the lithium investors. Defeated, I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, the reality crushing down. I had nowhere to go for help, not locally. The system was locked, sealed, and delivered by my own signature. Then I saw it. A flash of movement down the road, heading toward me at an alarming speed. It wasn't a patrol car. It was the sleek, black, unmarked SUV I remembered seeing parked outside Davy's office the night I signed the mineral rights addendum, the very vehicle the slick lawyer had driven. It slowed as it neared the office, the tinted window silently sliding down to reveal not Davies, but the developer himself, the man in the white hard hat, sitting smugly in the passenger seat, looking utterly relaxed. He smiled, that same contemptuous proprietary smile. Looking for Mr. Davies. Mr. Miller? Bad news. He's on his way to the Capitol to deposit his final commission. He sends his regards, by the way. He said to tell you the true cost of your debt wasn't the farm, but the certainty of your ignorance. The SUV began to pull away, but before it turned the corner, the developer leaned out one last time, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence of the roadside. Oh, and Mr. Miller, you might want to hurry back to the homestead. That noise you heard earlier? Silas was just the appetizer. The core drilling team just reached bedrock, and they just hit something that isn't lithium. The developer's final words echoed in the stillness of the abandoned lawyer's office, a cruel punctuation mark on a sentence of ruin, something that isn't lithium. The blood drained from my face as the black SUV disappeared down the highway, leaving me stranded with the terrible certainty that I had not just lost a farm. I had unearthed a secret vast and dangerous enough to warrant this level of coordinated, ruthless acquisition. I didn't think. I reacted. The image of Sarah shielding Thomas, the sound of the bulldozer, and Silas's insane defiance fused into a singular, desperate drive. I turned and ran back toward the homestead, pouring every last reserve of adrenaline into my legs, praying that the chaos Silas had caused had bought enough delay. When I burst through the tree line bordering our property, the scene was pure pandemonium, a bizarre tableau of industrialized warfare against a patch of dry earth. The bulldozer was indeed stopped, its massive blade resting precariously near the edge of the main foundation, but the focus had shifted. The security team had subdued Silas. He lay in the dirt near the smokehouse, his shotgun lying yards away, one guard kneeling on his chest while another methodically zip-tied his wrists. Silas wasn't fighting anymore. He was staring upward, his wild eyes wide with a strange mixture of defeat and grim vindication. Sarah and Thomas were still near the pickup. Thomas was conscious now, sitting up slowly, clutching the side of his head, his eyes bloodshot but focused. Sarah was screaming, not at the developers, but at the two remaining security guards who were now advancing toward the truck where Thomas sat, still woozy. "He's medically compromised! Get away from him!" Sarah shrieked, pulling Thomas behind her. The lead security guard ignored her, producing a heavy-duty set of restraints. "Mr. Miller, you are required to move the vehicle immediately. Failure to comply constitutes obstruction of state-authorized mineral extraction operations." It was then I saw what they were drilling for. The core sampler, a massive industrial drill rig, was positioned directly behind where the smokehouse used to stand. They had clearly moved Silas out of the way to resume work. The drill was retracted, and a team of 4 specialized technicians in hazmat-level gear were clustered around the drill head, using specialized hydraulic tools to lift the core sample out of the ground. And the sample they pulled up wasn't rock. It wasn't shale. It wasn't even the anticipated lithium-rich ore. It was a dark oxidized metal cylinder, impossibly smooth, perfectly cylindrical, and about the size of a man's torso. It looked ancient, yet utterly alien against the dry, cracked dirt of our farm. It looked manufactured, but by nothing I recognized. As the technicians carefully maneuvered the cylinder onto a specially padded pallet, the lead developer, who had apparently sprinted back from Davy's office, rushed forward, bypassing security and nearly tripping over the exhausted Silas. "Careful! Handle with absolute contamination protocol," the developer yelled, his previous smugness replaced by raw, grasping excitement. "That's the primary containment unit. That's not resource deposit, that's the payload." The word payload slammed into me, connecting with the bizarre hidden clauses in the contracts, the urgency, the sheer coordinated effort of a corporation and the state apparatus. This wasn't about lithium wealth. The lithium was the smokescreen, the debt was the trap, and the violation was the leverage to guarantee immediate, quiet access. Sarah saw the object too. She froze, her protective stance wavering as she looked from the strange metal cylinder to the panicked eyes of the security men, realizing they weren't just seizing a farm, they were covering up something buried deep beneath it. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, grabbing Thomas's arm tighter. The developer turned, his mask completely gone, revealing the fanaticism beneath. He looked directly at me, standing halfway between the road and the impending disaster. "That, Mr. Miller," he spat, his voice laced with terrifying reverence, "is why your family has been sitting on this property for 3 generations without knowing why. That is what Silverstream was really hired to find. And you, with your amateur digging and your desperation loans, nearly alerted the world to the fact that your dirt farm was hiding the government's biggest secret." He barked orders at his crew. "Load it. Immediate transport to Site Gamma. Forget the house. We have the payload. Secure the perimeter and remove the witnesses. Silently." The security team immediately shifted focus from Sarah and Thomas. They pulled their restraints from Silas and tossed them aside, turning instead toward the source of the new imminent threat, the developer himself. One of the security men, the one who had been kneeling on Silas, suddenly leveled his sidearm, not at Silas or the Millers, but directly at the developer's chest. "This operation is compromised," the security man stated flatly, his voice betraying a deep, military training completely at odds with his utility vest. "Unauthorized retrieval of classified material is a breach of standing directive. Stand down, Agent Thorne, or we secure the asset ourselves." The developer, Agent Thorne, froze, his face blanching. "What? This is my acquisition. My team reports to me." "Negative," the guard said, his weapon steady. "The site is now under direct military jurisdiction, following confirmation of anomalous material signature. The asset is moving to the control of the designated recovery unit. You are interfering with classified recovery protocols, Agent Thorne. Last warning." In that split second, the corporate takeover dissolved into something far larger, something involving clandestine government agencies and buried secrets I couldn't begin to fathom. My farm wasn't just sold, it was an accidental archaeological dig site. I looked from the armed guard facing down the furious developer, to Sarah shielding a dazed Thomas, and then to Silas still on the ground, a grim, knowing smile spreading across his lips as he watched the organized chaos unfold, chaos he had initiated. I knew I had only one move left. I wasn't going to a city lawyer or a local sheriff. I was going to the only person who had the sheer, desperate unpredictability to possibly navigate this entirely new landscape of treason and buried artifacts. I ran towards Silas, ignoring the armed standoff, ignoring the massive dark cylinder being carefully hoisted onto a military-grade transport trailer that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. I dropped beside my brother, grabbing his good shoulder. Silas, you knew. What is that thing? What is buried under our farm? Silas coughed, spitting dirt. His eyes, still wide, finally locked onto mine, shining with the terrible truth he had guarded alone for decades. He whispered one word, his voice raspy and triumphant over the sudden frantic shouting of the newly arrived military contingent. The well! He missed the well. Go back to the old wellhead, Jedediah. It's still pumping.